Hello there, you are listening to The Screen Queen, where you'll be finding your favorite movie or your favorite television show and learning something new. You'll just have to listen to find out. Here is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there, and welcome back to the show Screen Team. As always, and last time I checked, my name is Sammy Parrish, and you are listening to The Screen Queen. So, I think we all get worried about things getting forgotten. Whether it's by accident or by Thanos snap, some things are inevitable that they do go away, and we have to do what we can to keep it alive. And a while ago, I had read an interview that eventually became a meme where Sean Lennon was very concerned that the future generations would not know his father's music. And some people took that as, oh, Sean, you need some money, don't you? But no, I think Sean's onto something, as I'm also worried that future generations are going to be forgetting some of the eras that are worth remembering. We're at a time now that we don't apologize for the past, but I do believe we cancel things too soon without seeing the big picture. And Disney is, the most canceled name you can think of. There's conspiracies that last for the end of time until 7 more apocalypses that Buffy has to stop, and it'll still have some problems. But not all of them are problems. And some of them exist as the solutions in some of the Disney eras. One of my personal favorite eras is actually the Bronze era. But when I look at Disney's history, the Silver Age is the one that is the most important in my opinion. Now, this is just my little old opinion, so you don't have to agree with me, but when you look at how a company grows, the Silver Age of Disney was an era to experiment with more stories. They actually put a stop to some of their own genres to change things up when things weren't working. They invited new experimentational animation skills, and of course, a majority of this is done by the original 9 old men. So I don't want this to change your mind. I don't want this to magically make you unthink everything about Disney, but when you listen to this episode, I want you to think about the team that made these things come to life, because it was more than just WD going at this. There was an amazing amount of effort, and there are accolades that I was still shocked to find out. So get ready for the most weirdest history lesson of your life. This is the Silver Age of Disney. So starting our history lesson, we're going to be going to 1950, when the Silver Age of Disney began after the end of the Golden Age, or the Olden Age as I would just call it, because it's old and oh boy, there's some things that have not aged well, but that's another episode, because now we're on to interesting, better things and slipper things with Cinderella. The cultural impact of Cinderella is still very positive. I know the character of Cinderella is extremely problematic, and it is not that hard to see why, but over the past 75 plus years, Cinderella has had a better time than in 1950s, but we gotta start somewhere. It is still referred to as one of the most recognizable tales in history, from what Parade magazine has listed in the most greatest animated films of all time. And back in 2008, Cinderella was ranked as the best animated film at, the American Film Institute used to rank Cinderella as the 9th best animated film of all time. That's a pretty strong thing about a girl who loses a shoe and can't call CPS. But we gotta start somewhere. We had a tale that got a little better over time. We didn't really get off on the wrong shoe, but we had to get up on the right shoe eventually. But one last thing to say about it, and I don't want to give too much praise to Walt. This was one of his favorite transformation scenes. Walt Disney went on to say that the transformation of the torn ball gown into the beautiful, iconic ball gown we know and love and has since been altered is his daughter's favorite thing, and he made it for his 2 daughters. So if that's not a girl dad thing, I don't know what is. But then we certainly went down the rabbit hole with Alice in Wonderland, though. But ironically, as I found out, Alice was supposed to be our very first Disney princess. It was not going to be the girl that falls for a stranger danger eating a poisoned apple. It was this little girl going through a very strange world. You know, a younger girl. Oh God, that just it's awful to have to say it, but here we are. But knowing that, it definitely changes the ball game. Imagine if that was your very first Disney movie. How would you even go from there? That would, I think, go different ways of more opportunities or just wrong place, wrong time. The thing with a lot of materials, you never know when you release it how it's going to go. And eventually when Alice in Wonderland came out, it was a much safer bet knowing they've already got some films under their belt and they're going to be moving on to other projects. They haven't weirded out an audience that hasn't gotten accustomed to the many different stories that Disney can provide. I mean, looking at where they're at in 1951, being around for almost 20 years, you're still growing and trying to figure things out, and unfortunately it's still got some unfortunate canceled things, but that really did shock me to find out. So I have to say, I was never a big Alice in Wonderland fan. I'm more of a sea girl with the Little Mermaid, if you see what I'm saying. Anyway, Alice in Wonderland was a film that people, I think, didn't know how to take. Like, the fact that it's still a very young protagonist going into a very strange world, and you have a mishmash of different things. For what it's worth, being Disney's version, I mean, it was inescapable. When I was a little girl, I used to have this VHS tape, which, you know, is an ancient fucking square relic at this point, if anyone even knows what that is. And they had a section called Melody Time, which had an assortment of different films ranging from the 1930s to the 1960s. And they used to always feature a lot of the songs from there. So there were pieces of Alice in Wonderland that I found, but I never found all of Alice in Wonderland. No matter what rabbit hole I went through, this was always a movie that was very hard to find. And yeah, how in the world do you even like see where this goes? It is all the way a kid's film. It's made from a children's company. It's the attitude about it. It still feels very unique. There are a lot of different adaptations I've read of Alice in Wonderland and different visualizations. This one is still, I would say, a unique visualization. But now the way that Alice in Wonderland exists, it's for the stoners. There's always been lists that Alice in Wonderland has popped up on stoner films. Whenever I mention Alice in Wonderland to a lot of people, they're like, oh yeah, to get high with, and it's like, oh well, it landed somewhere in being entertained, so well, there's that. But more than just a joke about it being a stoner movie, it is kind of nice that it lives on because it was a box office failure. You just had Cinderella, which, you know, did milestones, but Alice in Wonderland was not received well until many years later. So again, imagine if that was your very first Disney film. Could have gone better, could have gone worse, we'll never know. This film was one of the very first things shown on one of the episodes of Disneyland. So yeah, they didn't really get somewhere, but Disney still utilized its own material. Of course they're gonna do that. But knowing that Alice in Wonderland still had chances, despite what it looked like, it kind of makes sense why it's still relevant, for how much it's still found a way in its own wonderland and entertainment. But it turns out that 1974 was the best year for Alice in Wonderland. Why 13 years after its re-release? Because it was given a second re-release, and it led to positive reviews, additional merchandising, home video, and it has improved critically over time. Alice in Wonderland took cues from the mistakes and improved rather than lived with it. I mean, true artistry will listen on how to improve. And Alice in Wonderland is kind of one of those examples to lead by. But then in 1953, the logo of Disney changed with the additional character from the next tale they were going to choose about a boy who never ages. And eventually that led to something else that didn't age well, Peter Pan. So Peter Pan was originally going to be the second Disney film. I just mentioned what was going to be your first. So can you imagine how that lineup was going to go? Alice in Wonderland and then Peter Pan in 1938. But fortunately, before we had that entire clusterfuck of chaos of every cancellation possible. There was a historical change to this. Pearl Harbor, exactly. When the attack on Pearl Harbor happened, Disney shelved the project when the studio was contracted by the United States government to produce training and war propaganda films. So, yeah, that's where that comes from. We could have gotten Peter Pan first, but we ended up getting the war ones. That is, it's like no matter where you turn, it's still bad, but knowing that is how it happened is still blowing my mind. Peter Pan is also a mark on the animation history, with one of the last films to be made by the original 9 old men. I mean, the OGs, and this is their last project. It's a very strange canceled honor, but still gotta honor the credit where it's at, that some of really beautiful things came from these people that, despite everything in a really shitty time period, gave us their amazing efforts. Now, despite being one of the most famously canceled movies in the history of canceled movies, among other canceled movies, Peter Pan was given positive reviews. I mean, in the time period before people knew things and really edited down some stuff, it's hard not to see, you know, a world you would want to go into. Just like Alice in Wonderland, now you get to join Peter Pan and the Lost Boys with the Darling Children. It's hard not to fall for you can fly, you can fly, you can fly, you can fly, you know, at least before you get to Neverland, and then things get super canceled. Yeah, I can still see some of the things that, you know, comes through the grapevines from Peter Pan. Peter Pan is still a beloved character when you take aside the film itself and look at the character, the charisma, the energy, the childlike wonder. You know, no one wants to grow up. You know, we say it at the time until we have to, but Peter Pan kind of keeps that alive for a lot of us. I mean, it's formed a syndrome. It's become a whole play on the Lost Boys. So no matter where you turn, you're going to have some impact of Peter Pan somewhere. Same could not be said about the voice actor that brought Peter Pan to the screen. Unfortunately, the actor, Bobby Driscoll, who did an amazing job, did not get the fairest of treatment and died homeless in an abandoned building at 30 years old. Unfortunately, he could not get the beautiful Disney rich treatment, just like unfortunately most of the other voice cast did not get the beautiful treatment and was just treated as a, you know, discarded character actor that did one thing and that was it. It's a sad example of what Disney can do to a lot of their cast, but Bobby Driscoll did do a fantabulous job, and his voice is still heard to make people fly and fly and fly and fly forever. But then the world went to the dogs in 1955 with Lady and the Tramp. So, big thing about Lady and the Tramp, it was the first ever movie to be distributed by Buena Vista Pictures, which is a big Disney distribution company we know today. Like, that's the reason why we're stretched to have other people consider Disney princesses. Like, if Buena Vista got rights, then there's some princesses. But anyway, I digress. This was following their split from RKO Radio Pictures, so 55 was a very big year for the Silver Age of Disney to go forward and how they wanted to, you know, keep everything going. How do you distributed pictures if you don't try to look for someplace else to put your movies at? It's how Disney had to evolutionize, like most other motion movie pictures had to evolutionize. Now, originally, Lady and the Tramp didn't get the best reviews, but they didn't get negative reviews. It was very mixed, since this was a different type of animal story that, you know, it wasn't like Dumbo, it wasn't like Fantasia, but when you pick a story from a magazine, it's a little bit, you know, off the beaten path, because that's where Lady and the Tramp came from. It was inspired by a cosmopolitan magazine story called Happy Dan, the Cynical Dog. So, yeah, that's how we got a love story. A dog love story came from a cosmopolitan magazine. But you wanna know the really weirdest thing? That the very canceled moment comes from its cast. So it turns out that the beautiful, infallible Peggy Lee is not only the voice of Lady, but also the Siamese cats, and I'm just like, you're kidding me, right? Yikes, man. Anyway, You know, the queen of American pop music is also the voice of the Siamese cats too. Peggy Lee has the honor of playing Lady, but then also has the role of playing the Siamese cats. When I was a little girl, I didn't think anything weird of the Siamese cats, probably because I was so young, but I always found them to be very creepy. But when you have to look at the scene, you have this very, beautiful, soft voice of a lady, and then you have that. I don't think I have to go into detail about how canceled that scene truly is. It almost speaks for itself on how we try not to talk about it as much and move on from things. But yeah, that's a little weird to find out that the talent here is very utilized, all around the board. That's amazing. Like Peggy Lee, God bless her, she can do some amazing things. But finding out that she did the Chinese Siamese cats, that's gonna take a minute for me. At least we've grown from that. I mean, it's gonna take a little bit of while after the 60s and the 70s, but eventually Disney got the gist to stop using racial accents to get a point across for a character and, not doing that. When I look at Lady and the Tramp, I mean, it's kind of been said and done that there's already been canceled moments that already sums it up itself. But the way I look at Lady and the Tramp now is it's almost inescapable for the beautiful tone. I feel like it's mixed because there's so many weird different storytelling elements going on that it had to age a little bit better in time, when you take out the racist cats. But when you get to the beautiful moment of Lady and the Tramp sitting down for spaghetti, you could have never watched the movie, but no, that's magic right there. There is no way to not hear Bella Notte and think about, one of the most romantic examples that Disney had to offer, and, to think it was dogs, but it's still sweet in its execution of what it did. Even before I knew all of the history regarding Lady and the Tramp and what happened eons after to get where we are today, it was still inescapable the past 20 years on the Disney trailers to see these two dogs having a beautiful romantic night, and it's been done to death. I mean, it'll probably live on after I probably lost my vision and I can still see the meatball being carried over, and hell, I even loved it when they did it in 102 Dalmatians to recreate their own scene within their own company because, oh well, I guess they own it. Nothing we can do about it. But it's that synonymous to still be talked about without anybody getting tired of it. It's still gonna live on, and yeah, it's still Disney, but I don't hear too many complaints about one of the quietest romantic moments. And I still think that's a lot to bark about. But then, oh my, Disney was not prepared for its demise from a Sleeping Beauty. So I talked about this before in the very early stages of the Scream Queen, where the Sleeping Beauty story was covered. So I've already done a lot, and if you want to go check out that episode, I'll put a link there. So I'm gonna just sum up the major parts for this historical history lesson. Sleeping Beauty is a phenomenally beautiful film. You had a different type of Disney villain, and you got to cover, the story you've heard, but not as beautiful as that one, with some of the most amazing talent, some of Disney's favorite ones. So it really felt like your Avengers Endgame of Disney, that you got to have all the game players, all the elements, except the only thing missing was a prophet. And around the time Disney was already launching into Disney World and Disneyland, and he was advised to not pursue Sleeping Beauty because it would mean financial ruin and he would never get to do his projects. Well, you can't tell Disney no, so he delivered on what he wanted to do, despite it being a box office flop. Now, this is kind of the hilarious thing that I look at is years later, a little film called Treasure Planet would come out, and the big whole hullabaloo about its box office failure was the complaint it didn't have a Disney princess, and it didn't have a Disney song, didn't have a Disney romance. Well, Sleeping Beauty had all of that and it still failed. So it always can't be the formula works, and Sleeping Beauty is unfortunately an example of that. But it is worth knowing how they made Sleeping Beauty come to life. So there's been a lot of stand-in actresses and models that they've used. I mean, that's kind of how we get most of our animated characters, is from the people we see in real life. Sleeping Beauties comes from a dancer, an actress named Helene Stanley, who was used for the realistic movements for the Once Upon a Dream sequence. And it's really cool. If you're able to look it up online and find a clip and just see her go back and forth, you can see very well how life imitates art. But despite not being a box office success, it is still very much used by Disney, even in their next era. Even though a lot of the blueprints has been used numerous times, but not only were their blueprints used, the same score was. You can find the same fight score between Prince Philip and Maleficent in the Robin Hood climax. Even though the 70s and the 60s had to reuse a lot of animation for the time period, it is really weird how way off the beaten path that Robin Hood decided to use their Sleeping Beauty climax score for theirs. It's a very weird thing that exists, but yep, it exists. But where Aurora actually came from in terms of her influences to make her a very unique version, because of course Disney has to make their own unique version of a princess that looks kind of the same. Audrey Hepburn is the likeness behind Sleeping Beauty, which I didn't know, but now that I know it, I can't unsee that now. Definitely in the eyes. Even though Aurora is the last Disney princess that Walt would ever work on before his death in the 1960s, but it is a little weird how there was an attempt to make Aurora a more lasting princess, because if you look at her, she only has about less than 20 minutes of screen time. It's about 12 or 15 minutes at least, depending on what version of Sleeping Beauty that you get. There was an attempt in the last decade to make Sleeping Beauty more of a Disney princess presence like the other ones, excluding Snow White, because why would you want to continue that? I mean, look what the fuck just happened last year. Anyway, I digress. Most of the Disney princesses and other stories were already getting another shot, and since things were getting revitalized in the long run, they were like, hey, let's give Aurora some screen time. And oh god, if you find the clips of Aurora in the new version that they've done to try and expand her character, my god, it's like giving a spin-off that has like a doomed plot. There's no life. It looks kind of derpy almost. It's very strange, because Aurora was a character that kind of existed to just be cursed, and there was no personality beyond that, and they kind of learned, maybe some things don't have to have a personality. Maybe some things are okay not having a personality, and Aurora is one of them. It was very difficult to make her character. I would even say that it was slightly better for a more adventurous role when the Maleficent movie came out, so at least that's better than what Disney itself tried to do with their own character that flopped and then did like a major disservice to her character. Aurora isn't exactly one of the most pivotal characters, but she exists for what she provided in the storyline of someone that will eventually be saved and true love's first kiss. It plays on the fairy tale emotions and the logical emotions, which is probably why she doesn't have much of a personality until the Renaissance period came along. But at the same time, I do have to give a little tiny smidge microscopic credit to Walt for staying on the path with this. I mean, technically this is the last ever Disney princess that he would work on, and that he didn't want to quit on this story, despite being told financial ruin would be all around him and there would no be Disneyland or World or whatever he wanted to do with his name. It makes a lot of kids like me happy that it does exist. Oftentimes when you're in charge of your own projects and someone tells you no and you have to push when someone repeatedly tells you no, I mean, it takes a certain amount of strength to do that. It is weird to have to say that the puppies are the reason why Disney got saved in the 60s, but yeah, that's what happened. Sleeping Beauty marked the end of the hiatus of the Disney princesses, and we didn't have one again until 1989, 35 years later. And no one was interested in princesses, so Disney whipped up the puppy project that has saved Disney to keep going forward, especially with Disneyland and Disney World and getting all those things involved to come together. The 101 Dalmatians is the reason why it's possible. It's weird, but yeah. Okay, so personally, I didn't grow up with 101 Dalmatians. I don't know why that film did not make it into its VHS tape relic collection, but it was hard to escape. There was no way to not hear about 101 Dalmatians from the book, the movie, the interestingly really great spin-off where one of the puppies wants to be an action pup. I don't know what 101 Dalmatians did right, but I'm glad they did it right. In the 60s, there was an experimentation with Xerox animation, or as I like to call it, the Xeroxties, because of this. Xerox became one of the hugest saving graces to help the animation of the hundreds of Dalmatians. When you really look at that and have to put the number in, oh man, I can imagine the sweat beads running down animators knowing what they'd have to do. If it wasn't for the Xerox, it probably saved a lot of money and sanity. When I got the chance to finally watch 101 Dalmatians at 27, it was probably one of the most purest experiences that made me feel like a kid again. So despite not growing up with this movie, it feels like that way that you have a timeless tale where it just takes you right back there. There are oftentimes I cite like celebrities or actors where I'm like, oh, I talk as if I'm really there, how much I miss them. And half the time my friend Natalie will be like, well, if you really liked it, then it does feel like you're right there with them. So with 101 Dalmatians, you do feel like you're right there with them trying to get back home. But this was also a first in the whole change of the Disney villains. No Disney villain death. You know, for the past 20-something years, 30-something years, it's always been over a cliff, stabbed and over a cliff. You fall off a branch and then you go off of a cliff. It's always been a cliffhanger, you know what I mean? This time, not the case. Cruella just gets into a, car accident and she is completely unharmed, aside from not getting a fur coat. And that's a beautiful ending in anybody's book. That move ended up becoming the best because now Cruella has become one of the funnest Disney villains to look for. There's kind of a rarity that you can have fun with a Disney villain, especially one where you have to look between the lines and go, wow, she does not care about animal abuse. She would rather those animals get abused to get her coat. That said, it's a much needed refreshing change that we needed. When you look at the Disney timeline, you gotta do something that keeps it from a villain going over a cliff. And in this case, Cruella didn't become a cliffhanger. Look at that. But the 60s took a definite swing from Dalmatians to Sir King Arthur with Sword in the Stone. Yeah, this one came out of nowhere. This is a film that is about 53 years old, and it doesn't have to exist, but a lot of people are glad that it does. It's almost like a comfort movie with the way that it's not trying to be the best King Arthur film. In fact, if you look at it, it's more putting the pieces together to see how you can see how they're referencing King Arthur's story without having to reference King Arthur's story, especially teaching it to children where not everyone's gonna get it. So it's a way to have fun with a story that isn't always for kids and is told different ways. And this is kind of one of the more interesting and fun ways that the story is remembered for many people that are fans of King Arthur and his whole story with Merlin. Archimedes is my favorite, that's who I'm here for. But with this also being one of the very first King Arthur stories, this film also serves as the last to be the final film animated from Walt Disney Productions in the Walt Disney timeline. And this is going to be very important for our last point, so keep this in mind. But this last film from the production, oh boy, it definitely feels like a last one because they threw every last thing they had into here. One of the really weird things about this film is that they were struggling with Wart's voice. And unfortunately that, when you're a teenage boy, your voice tends to be the same one day and then different the next. And they went through, this is a horrible sentence to have to say, quite a few boys to get Wart's voice. Some of them was actually the director's children that had to step in because they just needed to find a young boy's voice. So having to hear the movie, its mistake almost feels like a charm because you're getting to hear different kids that got an opportunity to be in a Disney film, even though it was literally a panicked last-minute decision. It's kind of cool to say I was 1/4 of Wart in The Sword and the Stone. Now, this film was also a mixed review. I mean, you have a whole story about Arthur that's told in different pieces with different pieces of different voices. That's not exactly going to work as a critical acclaim at the time, just because the fact that it's not your perfect film and it's told in different ways. It doesn't even feel like a movie. They're more like short stories just all put together. But this is one of the films that's also missing a Disney live-action adaptation. Oh, I bet you love to think that I'm joking about that, but no, I literally just found out that Disney did try to make a live-action from this version of Sword and the Stone. And it was going around since 2015. And then 2018, they announced a director, and then Disney Plus was going to be exclusively doing this. And again, this is not news because it got shelved in 2024. That's probably why you're hearing about this for the first time, like me. Okay, my last little things about Sword in the Stone. I like how it exists because it does feel like a genuine film about growing up. You get so many different tales about how to do things differently, and sometimes you mess up, but you gotta keep going. You gotta be yourself. It still does have genuine moments that doesn't have to have a legit answer. Most of the Disney films, you always had a lesson or a be-all, end-all. No, they just let things be your answer and your interpretation. There's not a right or wrong answer. There's just the answer that works best for the person going on their journey. And I love that that's the angle for it. It gives a whiz, it gives a bang, it gives a whimsy, it gives all that for Disney. At least until 1967. So 1967 marks the Jungle Book, which is the last part of the Silver Age of Disney. This was the last film that Walt Disney would ever work on because he died during production. And yeah, I know we've said a million things about Disney, and there's no way to unring the bell about his comments about many, many different things. But when you look at a time like 1967, where you're already in an experimental age of animation, you're also trying to figure out what is the next story to have to do. And there's been many stories that get shelved in different ways, and the guy that's supposed to be saying all of that is gone. And for what it's worth, I think it paid off. Like I said at the very beginning, take out Disney's name. Look at the way the Jungle Book made an impact at an uncertain time without their leader. This was a story that they adapted and has thus gone on to inspire so many fucking people. The amount of times that I've seen stories get inspired from the Jungle Book. I mean, recently the Gorillaz just made a music video entirely inspired by the 1967's version of the Jungle Book. That is the most specific target you can do to show how much that a story from 1967 made an impact in 2026. This was also the first time that Disney had actually made a list very quickly. It was the 9th highest grossing film in 1967. That says a lot for a company that has had very mixed reviews. And yeah, it makes their box office, but it's rare that you get both at the same time, and that's kind of a good ending note for that age. But oh no, it gets better. In 1967, there was also someone in that crowd, a certain Rocket Man, that he eventually made a little song called Your Song, called 3 Years Later. Of course, I'm talking about Elton John, and wouldn't you think that in the time to come that he would get to have his own Disney contribution, very Jungle Book inspired-ish, from The Lion King. So have someone in that theater that was like, wow, music? You never know where inspiration is going to hit, and the fact that Jungle Book is still responsible for some of these people before fame to inspire them and keep it going for generations to come, I mean, that's kind of the whole point of why we watch movies, is what creative things can we get that's going to make us want to do our own thing. And this sparked so many people. You had a Can You Feel the Love Tonight that eventually came through because Elton John was in the theater for watching this in 1967. Looking at the end of the Silver Age of Disney, there is an uncertainty that almost feels positive. It's a weird way to say it, but they lost their maker. I could say a whole other different things, but I'm sure everyone else has their own word for Disney. But nonetheless, when you wake up and your boss is dead and you don't know where to go from there, and even after his death that they found a way, the Jungle Book almost seems like a weird way to know that, in change, things can be okay. That's my personal take from it, that fairy tales had, a life here, and that they were still going from the Golden Age into the Silver Age. It felt like a beautiful bridge into the Bronze Age. Things were going to work out, and it's like, well, things are uncertain. Well, that's the beautiful thing about the future. You never know what you're going to do. And we end up getting some very interesting periods from then on to the Bronze, the Renaissance. I mean, the other periods have their own thing, but life still went on. It's a really weird way to look at things, but the way that Disney has existed for a life beyond before I was born, and getting to see how that's aged even beyond my own era, I think it's still worth keeping alive. Some things have self-canceled itself, but there are still some moments that are, kind of bibbity-bobbity beautiful. This has been a company built on making people believe that dreams can come true. And yeah, there are some things that don't age well, but that doesn't excuse that there are some moments that shine bright, just like the stars we wish upon, as cheesy as it sounds. But growing up with some of these films, I can still take away those elements that Disney's company wanted to have. And it's not too hard to see past the old mass productions and whatever, that there was 9 old men that worked together in this age to make these dreams come true, to see a girl find her Prince Charming and live happily ever after, to see one go down in Wonderland, to see what rules can be bent and broken and completely turned on their heads, to see what love can be like, no matter where you come from and your social standards, to believe in Neverland, to become a leader even when people think you don't look like you're going to be one, and that even in times of uncertainty, there's a sunset that's always going to be there to guide you into tomorrow. Well, I think that's going to be a wrap on this episode of history. Thank you so much for being here. This was quite lovely, going through a part of history that's not exactly easy, but there's still some beautiful parts to it, and I'm glad I got to share that with you all. Thank you so much for being here. But there's also a little announcement that I have been dying to make, that I wanted to wait for the perfect episode to drop this on. I have a new story. Since before I came out to California, I have been working on a short story. There's been a million things in the works, but this one I wanted to go ahead and greenlight. And it is a story called Neighborhood Cats. I have a dying obsession for them, so it was a matter of time before I made a story about them. It is inspired by a majority of the cats owned by my friends or ones from my childhood, and now I get to put my own hat in the ring, make my own cat story, and my amazing friend Natalie is drawing it to a comic. We have a couple of panels for a preview on the Neighborhood Cats Instagram page, which is spelled extremely weird to be able to keep the title. So if you would like to see the previews for Neighborhood Cats, as well as the hilarious promotional reels that we've been working on, you can check it out on the Neighborhood Cats. So if you want to catch up with me in between uploads, of course you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Screen. I'm available on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, probably anywhere. If you open your window, you might find my hilarious scream about movies somewhere out here. And don't forget to look for those bare necessities, those simple bare necessities. This is your Screen Queen signing off today.